First, I wish to thank Rabbi Eliezer for those beautiful words of appreciation of our Rebbe, Weinberg. It really was a very formative influence on Rabbi Chaim, and on myself, and on countless Talmudim. So we're going to explain here Halachot Talmud Torah. Beginning, the Rambam starts in a way that seems somewhat surprising. The Rambam starts like this. You could look inside. Noshim v'avadim uktanim peturim mitalmud Torah. Women, slaves, and children are exempt from the mitzvah of learning Torah. That's how he starts. The question is that this seems somewhat strange. You're starting a new section of halacha that you haven't talked about before. So the first thing you tell me is that there is such a mitzvah, there's such a chiyuv, there's such an obligation. Why do you start off by telling me who doesn't have the obligation? Before you tell me there's such a mitzvah, there's such an, you tell me who doesn't have it. It sounds strange. It sounds strange to start a mitzvah, to start a new section of halacha this way with pturim, with the exemptions. Maisa, if we were to think about what would be an appropriate way to start a section of halacha, what would it be? It would be, I would imagine, something like the opposite. Instead of saying who's pater, say the chiyuv. So say, kol ish mi Yisrael chayiv b'talmud Torah. Right? Instead of telling me women and children are pater, say that any adult male Jew is chayiv in Talmud Torah. That would be, you'd say in Hebrew, the way it's here, kol ish mi Yisrael chayiv b'talmud Torah. Now, if you would look at what the Rambam says in Halacha Ches, in Perek Aleph Halacha Ches, you find that is exactly what he says there. In Halacha Ches, he starts off, Kol ish mi Yisrael chayiv b'talmud Torah. That's what he says. So that's even the bigger question. So if you have to say it, why do you say it all the way in Halacha Ches? That should have been in the beginning. That should have been before the P'turim. Right? If it's necessary, that should be how you start off. Why are you sticking it all the way there? One question. A related question is, wait a second. It's in Halacha Ches. What happened all the way before Halacha Ches? I mean, let's talk about what he talked about in the other things. Why isn't Kol Ish Mi Yisrael Chayiv B'Talmud Torah before Halacha Beis, Halacha Gimel, Halacha Dalet? If we look through it, like let's say, I'll take an example. Let's say Halacha Hey. Halacha Hey says, Li'olam yulmod adam Torah v'achakach yisa isha. A man should always learn Torah first and then marry a wife. Right? If he first marries a wife, so then his mind isn't available so much to learn. So he should learn Torah before. But that only makes sense, l'chora. That would only make sense if you told me that there's a din, there's a mitzvah chiyuv that he has to learn Torah. So then you tell me, he should learn Torah before he gets married, because otherwise it won't go so well if he gets married first and then tries to learn Torah more. But it would seem to be that what you need in order to understand that halacha, yilmod Torah, you need to know there's a chiyuv to learn Torah. So why is that general chiyuv, that general obligation to learn Torah, and halacha ches, after you told me that when you should learn? You should learn only after you get married. And similarly, you have like a din in halacha daled, which is hayehu rotze lilmod Torah v'yesh lo bein lilmod Torah hu kodem livno. If he wants to learn Torah, he has a son who has to learn Torah, he takes precedence to the son. Well, actually, the din that he has to teach his son Torah that we said before in Halacha Aleph and Halacha Beis, he says there's a din that the father has to teach the son Torah. But why are you saying that he takes precedence to the son? That if he wants to learn Torah and they both can't learn, he takes precedence. Why are you saying he takes precedence? That would be because he has a mitzvah on him to learn Torah. But if that chiyuv only comes later in Halacha Ches, so that's strange, right? If you have a halacha and halacha dalet that is based upon the fact that a person has to learn Torah, so you should say that first. You should say that din of halacha ches before halacha dalet, right? Just like we said, you should say that din of halacha ches before halacha hey. You should say that din of halacha before. So why is that stuck all the way in halacha ches? It seems to be out of order. It doesn't make sense. right? So if we so these are like two basic questions. Why is the Peturim first, and then why are what we say the details that derive out of the general obligation, why are those before the general obligation? If you would think about it logically, what would be the best way to organize these halachas? What would be the way, like Rabbi Lachman was talking before about doing beseder, everything has to be, what would be the best way to put it, beseder? The best way would be like this. The first you tell me there's Kolish Misol Chayv B'Talmud Torah. Every male adult Jew has to learn Torah. That's the general statement. Then you have the details. When, before you get married, rather than after you get married, if you have a conflict with the son's chiyuv, if takes precedence to the conflict of the... Okay, you tell me the details. And then after you tell me the details, then you go to the Peturim, those who are exempt, those who this obligation does not apply to. Right? Yeah, that would be a logical way. First tell me the general, then tell me the details that follow from the general, and then tell me the exceptions to the general. Right? That would be... Now, if you look through every other section in the Rambam of Halachos, he always follows this order. Now, it will be a little bit, with more time, I could go through and show you in Hilchos Tefillah. For example, he first says there's a mitzvah to daven. And then he gives you the pratim, how, what, when, where, how you daven, what you daven. And then, 4 chapters later, whatever, he says there are people who are parta from davening. That's what he does in Hilchos Tefillah. That's what he does in Hilchos Tefillah. And that's what he does in every other section of halacha. He follows this order, which is the logical order. Because the Rambam, one of our teachings in Rambam, the Rambam always follows the logical order. You not only, it is important, in the Rambam, you not only have to be medayik every word, but you have to be medayik the placement and the order of the material. Oh, you have a clue?
Yeah, why does it make sense that exemptions should come before the details?
No, the exemption should come after the details.
Right, I know. Why shouldn't it become before? Like, let's say the guy that doesn't, he's exempted, so why should he...
Because you have the general, and then what follows from the general, and then the Peturim is where the general does not apply. So you first start with the general, and then you build off of the general whatever. For example, I'll tell you there's a mitzvah to daven. So what should I daven? When should I daven? Right? And then later you tell me, there are some people who are part of davening.
Right, but maybe you're not obligated to daven. That's what I'm saying. Before you go
that's true, but in the Rambam's understanding, but you see, you're talking about if I want to know whether I have to daven or not, I have to do. But in the framework of, let's say, practicality, it might make sense. But in the framework of logical order makes sense the other way. Because logical order is, you tell me, in other words, the particular follows from the general. Something that is an exception from the general is a hefsek. It's an interruption between them, right? Logical, you tell me the klal, and from the klal, these pratim follow. And then we have something that's a separate section there that isn't included in this whole klal and prat thing, right? So when you're following logical order would be that way.
He has to know what is the potter from. First we have to tell the chiyuv that you should know what is the potter.
Otherwise, what
are you potter from? Nothing.
Right, you have to know what exactly the thing is. You put in the logical, it makes that way. Now, if you want to go, I don't know whether I'm the one who is not. Okay, but Lamaisa, such a person has to know. So you look in the Perek Dalet. Don't look at Perek Aleph. If you want to know the Torah, you know where to look for. You see, that also helps, because if it's logical, you know in logic where to find the answer. But, okay. Good. That is the question. Why in Hilchos Talmud Torah that Lachor, it would seem, he goes in the opposite order than is logical, and the opposite order from every other place in the Rambam. So the explanation which Reform itself gave in this is real, since it is logical, since we found it in every other place. The truth is the Rambam here is actually following that order also, because. What we have to understand is, even though the literally first line of the Rambam is Nashim Avadim Ktanim P'urim Talmud Torah, that women, slaves, and children are exempt from Talmud Torah, even though that is the first line, but that is only there as a lead-in to what is really the beginning of Hilchos Talmud Torah. What is really the beginning of Hilchos Talmud Torah is the next line, Avol Koton Oviv Chayev L'Lamdo Torah. But, meaning what it says is, but a child, the father is obligated to teach him Torah. As Hilchos Talmud Torah starts with, the conceptual start of Hilchos Talmud Torah is a Koton, his father has to teach him Torah. Now, in order to understand properly what is that din of Koton Oviv Chayev L'Lamdo Torah, the Rambam had to say Noshim Bavodim K'tanim P'turim Talmud Torah. Okay, that's what it is. Now we'll just explain what that is first, because you have to understand, if there's the phrase, if there's Noshim Bavodim K'tanim P'turim Talmud Torah, that women and children and slaves are exempt, then he says Avol, but a Koton, his father has to teach him Torah. What does the word Avol mean in that sense? What does the word but mean? Right? What the word but means, like I said, I have to be medayek every word here. What the word but means is that I wouldn't have thought that that is true. Meaning, if you tell me that a Koton is potter from learning Torah, then I wouldn't have thought it could be that a father has to teach him Torah. The Rambam has to tell me, a Koton is potter, but the father is still obligated to teach him. Right? You see, that's what the but means. What the but tells you is that without the Rambam telling it to you, what the Rambam believes is that you wouldn't have believed that such a thing is possible. You would have thought like this: if a Koton is potter from learning Torah, a father can't be obligated to teach him, and the svara is pashut, because if a Koton is potter from learning Torah, how could there be a din the father has to make him learn? Like if a person has his own mitzvah to learn, so then somebody else can have an obligation to make him learn. But if the person himself doesn't have to learn, then how could somebody else be obligated to make him learn? Right? So if you're telling me Koton is potter from learning Torah without the Rambam specifically telling me otherwise, then I would think this means the father is not obligated. Or if you tell me the other way, if you tell me the father is obligated to make him learn, then I would think that must be that he is obligated. Because how could it be that somebody else doesn't have to do it, but somebody else makes him do it, right? So therefore, but if that would have been, then that would have been a misunderstanding of what Koton. The Rambam is telling you, no. You should understand, when I say that a Koton, a child, the father has to make him learn, it's not because the child has his own mitzvah. It's not because the father has an obligation to see to it that the child fulfills his obligation. It's a different concept altogether. The child is potter, but the father has to make him learn, because it's a din in that the father has to, and we'll talk about this later, give him knowledge. It's not a din that the child has to do a mice of learning, and therefore the father has to make him do the learning. It's that the father has to give him Torah. We'll explain that more later. But that's why, in order to understand properly Koton Oviv Chayev L'Lamdo Torah, that a child, the father is obligated to make him learn Torah, to understand properly what that means, he needed to tell me that a Koton is exempt. Yes?
But still, the Ikar mitzvah is learning yourself.
We'll get there. We're saying now that the Ikar start of Hilchos Talmud Torah is that the father has to teach the son Torah. We'll get to the question in the broader sense. But this is where we are right now, and we'll get to that later. We'll speak more to that point later. Okay? Let me go in order, and we'll get to the broader picture later. But right now we're saying it's Koton Oviv Chayev L'Lamdo Torah. Second of all, in order to understand properly this thing, he also had to tell me that Noshim P'turim. He also had to tell me women are exempt. Why? Because the next line of the Rambam, after he says the father has to teach him, the Rambam says, Ve'ein ha'isha chayeves lamed es b'noah. If you see inside, it says, and a woman is not obligated to teach her son, meaning a father is obligated to teach the son Torah, but the mother is not obligated. Why? Shekol ha'chayev lilmod chayev l'lamed. Because only somebody who is obligated to learn is obligated to teach. Right? And a woman is not obligated to learn. So in order to tell me that, in order to explain to me properly that the din of teaching a son Torah does not apply to a mother, you have to tell me that a woman is exempt. Because the reason why a mother doesn't have to teach the son Torah is because the mother herself is exempt from learning. So therefore you have to tell me, in order to understand this din properly, you have to tell me, number one, that the katan is pater, and number two, that the isha is pater, that the woman is pater. Right? So Mela, once you're saying that, of course, you're going to put in avodim, you're going to put in slaves, because once you tell me the other two, you're going to put in avodim, and that's right. So, but the point is like this. So what we're developing the argument that the real conceptual start of Hilchos Talmud Torah is Katan Aviv Chayv L'Lamdo Torah. The line that came before that was what we call prerequisite information. That's not the start, that is the prerequisite to the start. The actual start is Katan Aviv Chayv L'Lamdo Torah. Right? Good. Next question, we're going to start dealing with the question that he asked. What is the point of starting Hilchos Talmud Torah with the obligation to teach the son Torah? Why not start with the obligation of the person? First we have to realize that there are two other places in the Rambam where the Rambam starts with the obligation of the father to do to the son. We have a din in Hilchos Milah, that it starts there that the father is obligated to mal his son on the 8th day. It says if the father doesn't do it, then the basin has to do it. If the father and the basin don't do it, he says this, and then the child himself does it when he becomes a godly. That's one place we have. We have another place in the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben. The mitzvah of Pidyon Haben, it says that there is an obligation of the father. If we have, you can read it inside, but you could trust me, this is what the Rambam says. We could show the Rambam's inside later. It says that the father is obligated to be paida, to redeem his son, that is a Bukhara, to Ima Yisraelis, he's obligated to redeem him. He says later, if the father didn't redeem him, so then the son is obligated to redeem himself when he becomes a god. In both of these cases, it starts the obligation of the father, and then he goes through. But if the father didn't do it, if then nobody else did it, then the son does it later when he becomes a god. If you look, Hilchos Talmud Torah is exactly the same form, because it starts in Halacha Aleph with Katan Aviv Chayv L'Lamdo Torah, that the Katan, the father has to teach him Torah, and then it goes through some details, not the mother, etc., and then it finishes in Halacha Gimel of Misha Lo, and the second line in Halacha Gimel is Misha Lo Lamda Aviv, but somebody whose father didn't teach him Torah, so Chayav L'Lamed Es Atzmo Kishayakir. He is obligated to teach himself Torah when he becomes aware. Don't want to deal with Kishayakir now, it's a different shmuz to go about Kishayakir means, but it's the same format. In other words, the father is obligated to teach him Torah. If the father does not teach him Torah, then at some time in the future, the son has to teach himself Torah. Right? You see, it's the exact same form it used for Milah and for Pidyon Haben. By Milah, it says the father has to do bris Milah. If the father doesn't do and the basin doesn't do, the son has to do for himself at a later time when he becomes a gadol. The father has to do Pidyon Haben. If the father doesn't do Pidyon Haben, the son has to do for himself when he's there. Right? Talmud Torah also. The father has to teach the son Torah. If the father doesn't do it, the son has to do it at a later time, Kishayakir. The exact same format. Why is it the same format? Why is that the din? Well, if you think about it, that has to be the way you talk about Milah and Pidyon Haben. Because the way in which you're supposed to carry out the Milah is with the father. And it's not supposed to be that a person mouths himself. It's supposed to always be, there is a mitzvah on each Jew to do Milah, but it is on himself, but it is a mitzvah that should never come to the point that he has to do it. Because it's supposed to be done by the father when the child is too young ever to be a mechuyev b'davar. It's supposed to be, right, the lechatchila, the way it's supposed to happen is the father does it. If the father doesn't do it, good, so then there's a mitzvah on him. Pidyon Haben, the same thing. It's supposed to be when the son is only 30 days old. It doesn't happen, so then he has to do it himself. What the Rambam is telling me is that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is the same thing. That it's supposed to be that the father teaches him Torah. And okay, next question, what does Torah mean? But it's supposed to teach him Torah. If the father doesn't teach him Torah, then he does it himself. But really, the ofen halechatchila, the way to do it, the ideal way to do it is that it shouldn't be the son who's doing it himself. It should be that the father does it. And that's what he says. Only if the father doesn't do it. Misha lo lamdo av. If the father doesn't teach him, chayav lamed es atzmo k'sheyakir. Certainly, that sentence in the Rambam clearly indicates that somebody whose father did teach him is not obligated to learn the Torah. Right? It says only somebody is from Misha lo lamdo av. Somebody whose father didn't teach him Torah is chayav to learn himself. Somebody whose father did teach him Torah, it doesn't have the obligation to learn. Why? Because he already knows it. Because he already has it. It doesn't learn. Learn means you acquire, in this context, like we said, learn means to acquire the knowledge. If the father didn't give you all of the knowledge, you have to get the knowledge yourself. If the father did give you the knowledge, so then there's nothing for you to do. Just like the father did a bris milah. There's nothing for you to do. You already have the bris milah. The father did the pidyon haben. Nothing for you to do. He already did the pidyon haben. If the father was Malame Torah, he taught you, so now you know it. You don't have to learn anymore. You already have the information, right? That is the format. That's what it's saying. And if you know, this is very much clear based upon if people are holding the Gemara in Kiddushin. This is the Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Kaftes, that there are mitzvos habein al ha'av, and there are mitzvos of the son that are obligated upon the father. And these mitzvahs are Mila, Pidyon haben, and learning Torah. That's what it talks about. Then the Rambam holds what that means is these are mitzvahs on the ben. It's a mitzvah on the son, but it's really upon the father to do, so that the son never has to do it, right? And this is what it's talking about. And the three examples are exactly what we're talking about: Mila, Pidyon haben, and learning Torah. Right? That's clear. If you see in context, you learn the Rambam, what he says here in Talmud Torah, in context with what he says in the other places, you see that this is the picture. This is the structure that is going on. Now, what this implies is that the mitzvah of learning Torah is, we're talking here of being Lamed Torah, Limud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah that we're talking about here, what the word learn means in this context is acquiring information. That's what learning means. You have to acquire the information to yourself. So that's why if you already have the information, you don't learn because you already know it, right? We're not talking about learn. Sometimes we talk about learning in another sense. We talk about learning in the sense that you have to be involved in learning. Sometimes we talk about it. We're not talking about chazering. Chazering in this case isn't called learning. It could still be that you have chayav to chazr, not chayav to learn Torah. That's a different concept, right? We're not talking about learning. Sometimes we talk about learning in the sense that it's a mitzvah to be involved in the study of Torah. It's a mitzvah, it's a way of having the veikus, of cleaving and attaching oneself to Hashem and His thoughts and His Torah, right? If that would be the case, then you wouldn't be able to say only somebody whose father didn't teach him Torah is obligated to learn. Then it would be a mitzvah to learn. Everybody, even the person who knows it already, but he has a mitzvah to become dovuk by Hashem through learning Torah. We're not talking about that concept of learning. We're talking about learning, meaning acquiring information. Right? Is that clear? You understand the distinction? Learning in that sense, not the other type of learning.
Maybe say to you would must be a little bit that people should understand that there are two.
But we're getting there, so that's what I'm going to lead up to. I'm going to lead up to there. Right. In this point, we're not talking about that. So there's one implication we're talking about that, right, and then you're foreshadowing. In one case, we're talking about that it means learning means in the concept of acquiring information. That's one thing. A second thing we're talking about is the information which one is obligated to acquire is necessarily finite, limited. Meaning there's a certain amount. You read the book and then you know it and then you have it. It can't be infinite information, because if it would be infinite information, it wouldn't be possible to say somebody whose father taught him doesn't have to, only the person whose father didn't teach him has to, right? If you're telling me this, only somebody whose father didn't teach him is obligated to learn. So the mitzvah of learning is, like I said, acquiring information, and the information must be finite. There must be a definition and a limit once you have the limit, so then you're finished. There's nothing more to do. If it would be infinite information, you wouldn't be able to say that. The question that we have is, I think that's what Eliezer Chaim pointed out, is that, but we do know that these other concepts are true also. We do know that there is, in fact, a mitzvah to learn every day. There's a mitzvah to become deeper and deeper Havana, deeper and deeper understanding of Torah, to be, we call it Iyun, to get deeper, to delve into and get deeper and deeper understanding and become closer and closer. We know that there's a mitzvah of learning that way. We also know that there is Torah in itself is unlimited, right? Right? These are pesukim that tell us the Torah is in fact unlimited. Just like Hashem is unlimited, so too His wisdom is unlimited. We're all familiar with these concepts. We all know that there is a Torah that is unlimited also. So what about that? So the answer to that is that is what the Rambam is talking about in Halacha Ches. In Halacha Ches, he says, Kol ish mi Yisrael chayev b'Talmud Torah. What Kol ish mi Yisrael chayev b'Talmud Torah is a different chiyuv in Talmud Torah. There is one chiyuv, what we'll call it, one general statement of chiyuv of Talmud Torah, which is that the child, the father, has to teach him Torah, which means he has to give him over an understanding of Torah, and we have to define what is limited. It is a certain finite body of information. And if the father doesn't teach it to him, the son has to go out and learn it himself when he's the proper age. That's one chiyuv. Then there's another chiyuv. Kol ish mi Yisrael chayev b'Talmud Torah. Well, kol ish mi Yisrael chayev b'Talmud Torah means everybody. Everybody means both the one whose father taught him, the one whose father didn't teach him, the one who learned already, the one who didn't learn. Every ish mi Yisrael is chayev b'Talmud Torah. Period. That's what it is. The kol ish mi Yisrael chayev b'Talmud Torah, that every man, every male adult Jew has to learn Torah. That then is without limit, that then is without definition. That's where we talk about, as the Rambam talks about later, there is an obligation to learn lefi rochav sheyesh belibo, in accordance with the breadth of his heart, with how much he could understand. Every time it could be machadesh and learn more and more and get deeper and deeper understanding. That is the second halacha, and that is when we talk about everybody has to learn, and there's an ofen of dveikus. That is in that chiyuv. There's a separate chiyuv, which is that you have to learn a finite amount. And to learn the finite amount, that is what we're talking about in the general statement of Hilchas Talmud Torah, which is halachas aleph going into halacha gimel. So now that we have that, so then we understand the details which we talked about in halacha daled, halacha hey. We ask the question, why are the details of halacha daled and halacha hey before the general statement of halacha ches? Right? Remember we asked that question? The answer is because they don't relate to the general obligation of halacha ches. They relate to the general obligation of halacha gimel. Because in halacha gimel we're talking about a general obligation that everybody has to learn a finite amount of Torah. So when we talk about la'olam, for example, yilmod adam Torah v'achakach yisa isha. A man should first learn Torah and then marry a wife. Doesn't that sound like there is a limit to what you're learning? It says, learn Torah and afterwards marry a wife. That sounds like you finished learning Torah before you married a wife. How could that be? The answer is because that's what it's talking about. It's talking about the obligation to learn and acquire a finite amount of information. That obligation you should do before you get married. That's not the din of halacha ches. That's the din of halacha aleph through gimel. Right? We talk about in halacha dal the conflict of who wrote the Torah, v'yesh ben no Torah, who kodem lovno. We're talking about if a person has the obligation on himself to learn Torah and the obligation to teach his son Torah. What that conflict is between that he didn't learn his Torah, that he has to learn the finite body of information he has to learn, and he has to teach it to his son. So which one takes precedence? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about somebody who already learned all of Torah. The who kodem lovno is because we're talking in the similar types of obligations. There's an obligation to teach your son the finite body of Torah. You also have an obligation to learn the finite body of Torah because your father didn't teach it to you. Which one takes precedence? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about somebody who already learned all of Torah and then he is son. That's not what we're talking about. Then it wouldn't be who called him with no. It's only because it's talking about, it's based, that specific, that detailed halacha, that prat, that specific halacha is based upon the general halacha of halacha Aleph through Gimel, not the halacha of halacha Ches. That is the overall structure. Yes?
Are you going to talk according to the halacha, how much is that finite part?
We could, yes, if the olam wants, we can go right there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a question? You wanted to ask something? No. Okay.
Does the Rambam list Turim from the second type of Torah?
When he says the Pturim go on everything. Then when he says Pturim mi Talmud Torah, that goes on both dinim of Talmud Torah. Because it's two obligations of Talmud Torah. If you're part from Talmud Torah, you're part from Talmud Torah means you're part from both. That's it. The thing at the beginning, Talmud Torah, is from both obligations of Talmud Torah.
Is there two different names?
What?
Is two different names for it, or they both are the same?
Well, in the Rambam understands they're both the same mitzvah. The mitzvah of learning Torah includes two parts. There's a mitzvah of, is how I mean two different names of a mitzvah. The mitzvah of learning Torah includes both facets. There's a part of the mitzvah of learning Torah which is to learn a finite body of information, and there is also a mitzvah of learning to always learn more and more kathi kaicha, as much as you are capable of. And when he goes through in the halachas later, you see how he works them out, that all the obligations should come out, like in halacha Yud and Yud. So he works it out that you have all, how practically you work out that both of things could be fulfilled.
Therefore, basically,
Yeah.
we are learning like this, that just like Pidyon Haben,
Yeah.
and there is Mila.
Yeah.
By nature, you are very young, you can't do anything.
Right.
The father has to do the chiyuvim for the children,
Right.
and if the father doesn't do it, then the children should do it by themselves.
Correct.
Now, in the same token, learning Torah also is the same thing. Just like the here also, the father has to teach the children while they are young. They don't have that time themselves. The father has to do it, and then if the father doesn't do it, that embodiment of Torah, then he's mechuyav to do it. Therefore, Rambam sees it from the Mishnah in Kiddushin that
Right.
all three the same token.
Right.
And that's why he started the perek with the chiyuvim, that starting point of the chiyuv is from the father
Exactly.
to the children.
Exactly.
Now, could you go through the...
And now the other one, let me just say the other one, which is in halacha Ches, which is called Ishmi Yisroel for Talmud Torah. So the mokar of that is the Gemara in Menachos, I believe it is Daf Tzadik Zayin, that it says, Sha'al ben Dama ben Achoso shel Rabbi Yishmael ben Dama, the nephew of Rabbi Yishmael, asked Rabbi Yishmael a question like this. He says, Kagon ani shalamadati kol haTorah kula. Somebody like me, that I have already learned the entire Torah, right? He says, is it permissible for me to go learn Chachmas Yivernos, learn the Greek wisdom, and not learn Torah now? So he answered him, Karlav Mikra, he answered him with the following pasuk. It said, V'gisa bo yomam v'loyla, right? Yomish Sefer Torah zamipicha, v'gisa bo yomam v'loyla. Hashem told Yeshua that the Sefer Torah should never leave your life. You should always be thinking about it or speaking in it day and night. So it says, go look for a time that is not day and not night, and then you could go learn Chachmas Yivanis. Meaning, no, you can't, because there's no such thing as I mean, what he's saying is like this. You thought that you would be, what the thought of the questioner was, I already finished all of my obligation, all of Mishalolam, the oil of Chayv Torah. I already finished the entire finite Torah. I already learned Kol Torah Kula. Whatever is the limited definition, I've learned that. So now maybe I could go learn something else. He says no, because of the other obligation, because the obligation of the V'gisa B'yom V'layla, you still shouldn't go learn other things. You still have a mitzvah bittul Torah that you shouldn't stop that learning. Now, the V'gisa B'yom V'layla is what the Rambam quotes in Halacha Ches. Right, in the end of Halacha Ches, you say this din kol shmiso chayiv b'Talmud Torah, and then he continues with more details, and he goes v'gisa b'yomim v'loyla. Right, the v'gisa b'yomim v'loyla is the source which the Rambam brings for the second din in Hilchos Talmud Torah, which is the din that everybody has to learn, even if Father already taught him you have to learn. Right? The basis for that is, right, where you see it clearly in the Gemara, is in that Gemara in Menachos Daf Tzadik Zayin. Right? And that's the second din. All right? Fine. Should we go further, or is it?
No, could you now explain every halacha and halacha, why is it there? In other words, you are working now halacha aleph the children, that is grandchildren, that include also.
Yeah.
Can you do that? In other words, now, what about
So base. Well, okay, to do it in detail would be like another half an hour here to explain what exactly the chidushim are. But there's an obligation. What halacha base is. We started with halacha aleph that a father is obligated to teach his son. So what's happening in halacha base is he's saying there's a similar obligation to teach a grandson, and I don't want to get into it, but because of this, there are points of repetition that might add a different facet of obligation to the son. And then he adds a different idea that you can teach other. Okay, there gets into the mitzvah. It's like this. There is an obligation of the father to teach the son Torah. And there's an obligation of the father to teach a grandson. And then there's an obligation to teach other Talmidim. And then the Rambam, with that, there's no regular achas, I can't deal with the details, but there are differences, and so he's pointing out the differences. So you should understand what it means from teaching a son and teaching a grandson, right? And then he continues with some of the things in Halacha Gimel, that the obligation to teach a son also is an obligation to pay for a melamed, that if you're not going to teach him yourself, you're obligated to spend money to hire a melamed, hire a tutor or a teacher to teach your son. That's what he says. And then he continues with, so then that's all talking about clarifying what are the halachas of the son, of the father teaching the son. Then he says if the father doesn't teach the son, he's chayv l'lamed es atzmo. V'chein hatamotze, that's another shear to go on what the v'chein hatamotze is. Why you need it here? Okay. I spoke about that yesterday in that other shul there. What's it called? RMS or whatever. I spoke in the other shul on that. What v'chein hatamotze is. Halacha Daled we explained. What about if there's a conflict? The father has to learn Torah and the son has to learn it. So what do you do in the case of conflict? Halacha Hey is the obligation of the person to learn himself. Should that be before getting married or after getting married? Right? Then in Halacha Vav it becomes more practical. Until this point it was setting out the parameters. Now Halacha Vav is where do you start teaching him? What age? What material do you start? So you start from the time the child starts talking. You have to start teaching him. And then which pasuk do you teach him? Torah Tzivolana. The second pasuk, Shema Yisrael. And then many more psukim. And then, okay, it goes to Melamed Tinokos. Okay, and then it talks about how much you have to pay. He says you have to pay for the entire Torah Shabbat, meaning, so from there actually you see that the mitzvah of a father to teach a son Torah. Okay, next question, you want to know what is included in the obligation. Certainly, Kol HaTorah Shabbat Kula, the entire Torah Shabbat, because he says that even Bischar, he's chayav to teach him Bischar, means he's obligated to hire a tutor to teach his son until he's able to learn Torah Shabbat Kula. Now what Torah Shabbat Kula means is the entire Tanakh, 24 books of Tanakh. You see that very clearly in Halacha Yud Beis. The Rambam says Divrei Kabbalah b'chal Torah shebechsav hein. And Divrei Kabbalah means the words of Nevi'im and Ksuvim are included in Torah shebechsav. Right? If you want to know, if you go through it, you see Rashi holds not. And the Rambam, and it would seem that the post can go with this, hold that the obligation to teach includes not only the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, not only the 5 books of the Torah, but also Nevi'im and Ksuvim, because that even has to do with Schar. Torah Sheba'al Peh, yes?
Until he gets married, or the beginning part of his...
It's like this. It's that it is the father's obligation to teach him as much as he can, right? And if the father doesn't do it, then the son has to do it. And the son is, right?
Nice.
That's how it works out. But it's the father's obligation to teach him. Okay, we could go...
Maybe finite. Maybe you explain what's the finite.
So, okay, so next thing we do is what is the finite? Well, so that's what I'm going. Certainly, the finite. Okay, and then there's the finite, and then there's the question of do we carry it out nowadays? Not carry it out, which is going to be a whole, you know, we could be here a couple of days on this. But the first thing is clearly I'm showing in the finite Torah is included all of Torah Shabbat. Because the Rambam says clearly in Halacha Zayin, it's chayav lalamdo bischar ad shika Torah Shabbat kula, that he even, not only is obligated to teach him, but even bischar, meaning what that means is that if, let's say, the father doesn't have time or doesn't know it himself or whatever, he is obligated even to spend money and hire a tutor to teach him Torah Shabbat kula. And what Torah Shabbat kula means, even if after he learns Chamisha Chumshei Torah, he steps to learn Yeshua and Shoftim and Shmuel all the way up to Divrei Yamim, right? So it means the entire Torah Shabbat. That is one chiluk, and then, but right, but the Torah Sheba'al Peh not, right? But then he goes through with the Torah Sheba'al Peh. What the implication is, I can go through it. The implication is that Torah Sheba'al Peh, he is not obligated bischar, which means he is not obligated to hire a tutor to teach him Torah Sheba'al Peh, but the obligation of the father is to teach the son Torah Sheba'al Peh, if he can, because he's not obligated to pay money for it. And the son himself is also obligated, and there he actually might be. So if you go through the halakha later, see when the son himself is obligated, he actually, in certain cases, could be obligated to spend money to hire a tutor to teach him. So, without getting into the details of it.
Define what's the finite Torah.
So who defines what is the finite? So Torah Shebachsav is finite because it is, right? If you have a Tanakh here, it's a book, right? And you finish the whole book, it's finished. That's right. Torah Shebachsav is certainly finite, right? There's a book. It starts with Bereshis. It ends with the last pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. That's a book that is finite. Torah Sheba'al Peh is also a finite entity. And that is, we'll have to deal with it. See, that we'll have to explain more, but that is what the Rambam explains in the Hakdama, in his introduction to the Yad HaChazaka. He explains like this. What he says there, we'll say this briefly. If you want the explanation, we'll give explanation. You know, Rabbi Levi Chaim mentioned that we wrote the Sefer from Reform on the Hakdama. And this is why, one of the reasons why it's very important, because the Rambam says in the Hakdama that if you want to know what this book is, what this book, the Mishnah Torah is, he says what the Mishnah Torah is it's a mikbat, the Torah Sheba'al Peh Kula. It is a compilation of the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh. Right? That you don't need to look at any other book. I mean, well, if you have all the volumes of the Rambam here, but if you have all the volumes of the Rambam, this has the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh in it. Right? If you know, he says more. He says it's called Mishnah Torah. Right? You know why it's called Mishnah Torah. The Rambam, we call it Yad HaChazaka many times, but the Rambam himself called this book Mishnah Torah. Right? You know why he called it Mishnah Torah? What? You know why he called it Mishnah Torah? He says. The Rambam says it. Lefikach. I'll tell you. I'll just read you the words. Lefikach karasi shem chibur zeh Mishnah Torah. Therefore, because it includes the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh, I called the name of this book Mishnah Torah. Because the person reads Torah Shebachsav first, and then he reads this book, Torah Sheba'al Peh Kula, and he knows the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh from this book. He doesn't have to read another book between them. You know what it means? He doesn't have to read another book between them. What does it mean? It means like this. Mishnah Torah means it's the second book. It's the second book because you don't have to read another book between it. Meaning, you just do the Torah Shebechsav, good, Tanakh, you got it. You just do this, you have Torah Shebal Peh, you got it. You don't need to read another book in order to understand the Rambam. That's what he's saying. That's why it's Mishnah Torah. Mishnah means second. It means it's the second Torah. So it's that the finite, and to go through the reasons and the svaras back and forth, we could either take me back to say Shir another time on it, or you could go through the Sefer I wrote already from Rav Weinberg. You'll see there all the details of it. But Lamaisa, what happened is that the Rambam, whatever is the Torah Shebal Peh, what it means is it is the halachos that you have to carry out, that the Mesorah Baal Peh includes the halachos, how you carry out the Torah, that is the finite Torah Shebal Peh. And so what the Rambam did is that he put all of the Torah Shebal Peh, which was scattered out in the Gemara, in the middle of the Shakvat, the little parts that are Torah Shebal Peh, in the middle of lots of other information, he took out all of that goes into Torah Shebal Peh from the Gemara and from the Yerushalmi and from the Tosefta. He took out everything and put it in one book, so now you have it. Now you have all the Torah Shebal Peh, and now it's, in a sense, much easier to learn it all. Because, so what the finite body of Torah is, according to the Rambam, is one book called Tanakh, another book called Mishnah Torah. Now, whether we carry that out or not, you see the problem is we don't always pass like the Rambam. You probably pass like the Rambam more than we do, right? So we have to go with the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah if they argue with the Rambam. But the point is, whatever are the halachos that come out from the Gemara, Talmud, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Sefer Sefer, and Tosefta, so those halachos become the Torah Shebal Peh. And I didn't prove it, explain it, but there's a whole other shiurim and yarn to explain how it works out. Yes?
But everything is implying that when you teach the child, he's going to learn it. So
right.
Maybe the child is not a genius. How is he going to learn everything?
So you do the best you can.
Right, but that's not what it says. It says that you have to teach him all.
Well, okay, it means, okay, just because you're obligated doesn't, your obligation is to do the best you can. You're not doing anything, see, your obligation is to do as much as you can. You can't, God doesn't hold you to account for something. So that means it's a chiyuv to do, but the child isn't smart enough, it can't, so you do as much as you can.
The results are not in your hands.
What?
The results are not in your hands.
100%. Anytime I'm telling, that's obviously, anytime I'm telling you that you have to teach somebody else, it's not in your hands, but you're obligated to teach. Whether the child learns, you're obligated to do as much as you can. Right? You're not doing anything wrong. The obligation defines what you have to do. Right? Yes?
Does it imply that you have to master Torah stuff before you even pursue Torah Shebal Peh?
That's a complicated question.
What's the question?
This question was, does this imply that you have to learn all of Torah Shebal before Torah Shebal Peh? The simple answer is not, and we could go through in details, because what the Rambam actually says is that the way you have to learn is you have to spend a third of your time in Torah Shebal, a third of your time in Torah Shebal Peh, and a third of your time in Gemara. That's an halacha. We could talk about that another time, but that's an halacha Yud Aleph. So, and that's going before you learn everything. So you're actually supposed to spend a third here and a third there and a third there, meaning a third in the book called Tanakh, a third in Torah Shebal Peh, which the Rambam holds is this, the Mishnah Torah, by also might include Shulchan Aruch in different places, but whatever, but this, and a third of the time in Gemara, which means the Svaras and the Ian and the Amkas and Gemara. Right, that's how you're supposed to learn. So you're not necessarily supposed to learn all of it, but see my safer, and there's more discussion there.
Because we spoke about a few different scenarios. The guy needs to get married or
right. So what that means is the way the Rambam now the question is whether we paskin totally like the Rambam with this or not. Now I don't know. See, I'm more familiar with Ashkenazi Psak. I'm not that familiar with Sephardi Psak, but I know in Ashkenazi Psak, maybe you go with this also. No, the Rambam holds that you learn a third.
I mean, the yeshiva world.
They don't follow this. You see, because we have to realize this because there is a machlokas among the Rishonim. the Rambam holds that the way you have to learn Torah is a third, a third, a third. Meaning, he says, if you have 9 hours a day to learn, you spend 3 hours a day learning the Torah Shebechsav. This is literally what he says in Halacha Yud Beis. Right? He says in Halacha Yud Beis, Ketzad, Haya Baal Umnis. His action is you have a little profession, a craft. And you have to spend 3 hours on your craft to make a parnasa. Ubetorah Teisha. And then you have 9 hours which to learn. Right? Meaning if you wouldn't have a craft, maybe you'd learn 12 hours. But if you have a craft, 3 hours, you have 9 hours in learning. So Osan HaTeisha, those 9 hours, Korei B'sholosh Men Torah Shebechsav. In 3 hours you learn Torah Shebechsav. Ubisholosh Torah Shebal Peh. And in 3 hours of them you learn Torah Shebal Peh. Ubisholosh Acheros Mizbonin B'dayit Olav and Dov Mitoch Dov. Right? And the other 3 hours you try to understand one thing from another thing, and that is what he said is called Gemara. So basically you would, if you have 9 hours to learn, what the Rambam holds, your obligation of learning Torah is to learn 3 hours Torah Shebechsav, 3 hours Torah Shebal Peh, 3 hours Gemara. That's what the Rambam paskins, that's the halacha, the Rambam psak. The Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch brings that the Rabbeinu Tam disagrees with the Rambam, and he says that like this, that Talmud Bavli is Bolol Mikulam. He says the reason why it's called Talmud Bavli, one of the reasons is because it's mixed together. It's based on a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. It says that Talmud Bavli has mixed together in it the Torah Shebechsav and the Torah Shebal Peh and the Gemara. So we could be Yotzei, we could fulfill our obligation of learning Torah just with Talmud Bavli. Now that needs explanation. What that means is that first of all, the Rabbeinu Tam holds that when it says that you have to split your time into thirds, it does not mean equal thirds. The Rambam holds when it says you have to be meshalesh l'midasa, the Gemara actually says you have to split. He says thirds means a third, means each third is equal to the other third. The Rabbeinu Tam holds it doesn't have to be equal. Right? And another point is that the Rambam holds they have to be distinct. A 3 hour here, 3 hour here, 3 hour there. The Rabbeinu Tam holds it doesn't have to be distinct, it could be all mixed together. Right? Those are two different points. Number one, they don't have to be equal. Number two, they don't have to be distinct. They could be all together. Right? Now, with that, he says, so shlish doesn't mean that it just means that you have to be involved in all 3 areas. Which would mean that, for example, that would apply, I'll just say, if you're learning Talmud Bavli, learning Talmud Bavli means that you're learning Keseder, Talmud Bavli, you're learning, let's say, what we call a Daf Yomi, or an Omagim, you're learning at a pace. If you're learning Talmud Bavli at a pace, you're going to learn, there are going to be many Pesukim that come up, there are going to be many Halachos that come up, there's going to be lots of Svar, you're going to get everything. But if, let's say, somebody learns a sugya the way they learn an Ian Seder in yeshiva, which is, the way they learn Ian Seder in yeshiva is that you learn the Gemara and then you go into what the Rosh says and what the Rashba says and what the Ramban says, and then you go into what the Achronim say in Yeshua, and it says, you're not really learning Talmud Bavli then. Then all you're learning is Gemara. Right? When the Rebbeinu Tam says learning Talmud Bavli means you're learning Keseder in Talmud Bavli. Or if, let's say, you have a Seder, you're just learning Shulchan Aruch, Beis Yosef and Shulchan Aruch. So you're only learning then, actually, Torah Shebal Peh, because you're learning the Halacha. And there's also a lot of discussion. So you're learning Gemara, but you're not learning Psukim. So you're not learning Torah Shebal Peh. But if you're learning a book in a way that you're learning through Torah Shebal and Torah Shebal Peh, that is what Rabbeinu Tam holds is good enough. But, now, the further implication of that is that you could postpone the time when you finish it to much later. Meaning that if you were to learn Torah, I'm sorry for taking too long. Okay, if you would be learning Torah, like the way the Rambam says, to learn a third of your day, you will finish all of Torah Shebal and Torah Shebal Peh within a couple of years. What? No, not a month. No, it's not that easy. Not that easy. No.
9 hours a day.
Yeah, now if you have 9 hours a day, you learn 3 hours Torah Shebechsav, you go through, you learn Keseda, you learn and he's talking about learning Keseda, the way that the Zilberman learns nowadays. So you learn it up in the way the Zilberman program learns, you learn it up. And then you would learn up the Rambam. You would need somebody to explain it to you. It's not so simple. But if you learn with a Rebbe who knows what it is, he's talking Torah Shabbat Peh also. He doesn't mean you learn yourself. You need a Rebbe, but with a Rebbe who could teach to you what this word of the Rambam means with that, you can learn it up, and then you learn it up, and you have regular chazaras. If you learn in that way a couple of years, you could finish it.
See, Baruch Hashem, Rambam explained who is he talking to. He's talking to somebody has 9 hours of learning.
Yeah.
Baruch Hashem pointed out that.
Yeah, he
There's no
pointed out.
difference that Ashkenazim Sephardim and Ashkenazim as far as the learning. But
I mean, you also go with the
Yes,
Rebbe time. It's a
No,
Ramah.
Yes. The Rambam says here, Mishlam lo aviv, hayo lamed etatzmo mishi yakir.
Yeah.
Now, first of all, what's yakir?
That's a
Then-
good question.
Then the point is that the father, the true of the father falls off.
No, it doesn't say the fear of the father falls off. It never says that.
The
The father is chayav the rest of his life. He'll tell you, because all Yehu lo Torah, no lo Torah. Yeah.
Maybe that period of time.
If you go through the Gemara,
Never-
you'll see in the Gemara it's talking about
Where that
it's talking about that he went to a bayit
source
or
of
a
yakir?
Gemara.
Where is the source of yakir? And what does yakir
That's a very good question. Something another year.
But,
It's not clear.
Because,
Not clear.
But the cube doesn't follow. Another person.
The chiyuv does not
Listen,
fall off.
nowadays-
The Rosh Hashiva held the chiyuv doesn't fall off. The Rav Shulchan Aruch passes here doesn't. Still, yeah. My father still obligated to teach me Torah.
Yes, therefore nowadays, in other words, the embodiment of Torah, I guess, would mean all of, as you said, in other words, all of the Mishnayot, the Sefer, whatever that talks about halacha lemais.
No, what Torah Shabbat Peh, no, it means just the halacha that is paskin in the Gemara. Which many halachas of Shulchan Aruch are not that. Because many halachas of Shulchan Aruch are new cases that came up after the Gemara. We'll go through that Gemara. It means only those, you see, and the Rambam only mentions those cases that were paskin in the Gemara. A new shaila that comes up, he might say, Horu HaGaonim, or Yeroli. That means it's not. That means it's something the Gaonim said. That means it's not the Stam. The Stam, it's not the Torah Shabbat Peh. We'll have to go through and explain it if you want. We could explain another time. But the yesod is that it's only from the Torah Shabbat Peh, which is the last Torah Shabbat Peh is the Gemara. Because after the Gemara, it's not a Torah Shabbat. It's not. We could talk about that, but you understand what I'm saying. That the halacha of learning all of Torah Shabbat Peh is all of the halachas that were paskin in the Gemara and the other Sifrei Chazal that are musmach, that are authorized to give us binding halacha. Now that would include Talmud Yerushalmi, where it does not conflict with Talmud Bavli. That would include Tosefta, it would include Sifra and Sifrei. So wherever those Sifarim give us a halacha from the Baalei Masorah, that is Torah Shabbat Peh. A new case that comes up, a new Shaila, that's not Torah Shabbat Peh. We might need to know in order to do, but that's a different thing. But it's not the Torah Shabbat Peh. The Torah Shabbat Peh is that which is in the Masorah of Baal Peh, the Paskin Halach.
I have a question.
Sure.
From Halachot Aleph, where it says that the father is obligated to teach Torah to the son. So can we learn from here that if they ever has a son, he's also obligated to teach his son? And also,
I'll tell you, but can I answer that question?
Yes.
The answer to that question is no, because we would learn it out from the second half of the halacha. Because the second half of the halacha tells us that a woman is not obligated to teach her son Torah, because only somebody who's obligated to learn Torah can be obligated to teach somebody else. So since the woman is not obligated to learn Torah, she cannot be obligated to teach her son Torah. And Eved, we said in the first line, is not obligated to learn Torah, right? So then that same logic teaches me that an Eved cannot be obligated to teach his son. Because only somebody who's obligated themselves to learn can be obligated to teach their son Torah. Good? Okay, excellent. Second question.
So second question was, I think maybe you answered it, you kind of answered it. Just, so I was going to answer if the actual obligation is upon the father, but the woman can also teach the son Torah, right? I thought
she can.
She
Doesn't
she
say
has an
it's,
obligation
yeah, but she's
to
not
teach-
obligated.
she has an
There's no
obligation to
mitzvah.
teach
She can.
chinuch, right?
What?
She has the opportunity to teach chinuch to the kids. growing
That's a
up,
different
right?
issue. We're not talking about the mitzvah of chinuch. Right, but that's a whole different shaila. You have a different shaila whether a woman is obligated in chinuch. Not so much focus in the Gemara whether a woman is obligated
So
in chinuch and
where it
in the
says,
poskim. But that's a different sugya. That's a different topic. Whether obligated in chinuch. We're talking about obligated in teaching Torah, right? Chinuch is a different
So
topic.
in Percher it says Kol Yisrael Chayav. It also applies to the Eved in this case as well.
No, because an Eved is not considered an Ish Yisrael. Right? He's only a partial Yisrael. He's not a full Yisrael. So Ish Yisrael does not include an Eved.
Why
Yes.
not himself chayav for Brit Milah?